So National Science Fiction Day, we passed that this past week. It occurred on January 2nd, and it was started to commemorate the birthday of the great science fiction writer Isaac Asimov, and is today recognized by the Hallmark Channel, as well as sci-fi lovers across the country. And so why not have North Shore Unitarian Church recognize National Science Fiction Day as well? This also happily coincides with one of our newer members giving me a book to read, a sci-fi, really it's the first book in a sci-fi trilogy, and I've been really engrossed in these novels. And the novels are by Cixin Liu. He's a Chinese writer, and these books weren't translated until about the last decade and a half into English, but they have achieved international accolades and won multiple awards that are significant to the science fiction community. And I think they're quite deep, quite profound, and really, I think like all good literature, they ask some pretty profound questions about the human condition, about life and existence, and so I think they're worth exploring. Now, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about them without giving away too many spoilers, because I don't want to ruin it for you, but there will be a few in here, so fair warning. And if you're just absolutely allergic to that, all I can say is you're going to have to plug up your ears. All right, so the book, the first book in this trilogy is called The Three-Body Problem. And it begins with the Cultural Revolution in China. And what happens in this opening sequence in the novels is that this professor of physics is teaching his classes, and he is arrested. And he's arrested because he is teaching scientific theories that were created by people outside of the communist context. And so he's accused of sedition. He's teaching Einstein's theory of relativity. And so he's accused of being a reactionary. And as almost comical as that sounds, the book starts to take some really bleak turns pretty quickly. He is taken onto a stage and murdered. His daughter is sitting in the audience and sees all of this. She leaves that situation, and you don't get too much of an insight into what's happening in her internal life, but you can tell that this has really impacted her, as it would. So she starts to study science and wants to become a scientist herself. And while she's putting herself through school, she goes and starts to work with the forestry division in China at that time. And what's happening in that context is that all this clear cutting is occurring. It's 1960s. China, and that was happening in the United States too, but that was also happening in China. And there's this one really telling moment in during that sequence, in which she looks at a stump of a tree that has just been cut, and she counts the rings, and she says, this tree was 300 years old. And she says to the guy who just cut it down, you cut it down in under 3 minutes. Like, do you have anything to say to that? And his response is, isn't human technology magnificent? She gets a copy of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which was translated into Chinese, and it's being circulated in this underground group of people who are working in the forestry division, and she's caught with it. So that is also considered to be reactionary literature. She is imprisoned, and she's almost killed while she's in prison. Okay, so all of that, nothing really sci-fi there yet, but it's about to take a hard sci-fi turn. astronomy division realizes that they need a theoretical physicist, and that's what her training is. And so they basically take this character and imprison her within an astronomy lab. And while she's working on different projects, you know, the competition to get into space and all of that is really important, you know, at that time. And so, you know, she's working on those sorts of things. But here's where the sci-fi piece comes in. She discovers a way to harness the power of the sun in order to send a message farther into space than human beings have ever been able to send a message. And she sends this message out saying, you know, we're, you know, we occupy this planet in this solar system, and we are a group of people that, you know, have many conflicts and problems, but we would love to reach out and communicate with any other civilization that might be interested and might receive this message. A couple of years go by, and then she receives a response. And the response is, do not respond, do not respond, do not respond. And then it goes on to describe that the person who has intercepted the message is a sort of underling within that civilization's hierarchy. And he says, if you respond, the people who are in charge here will be able to find you, and they will come and destroy you. And I'm intercepting this because I don't believe in what they're doing, but do not respond to this message. Given her history and how she feels about the human condition, the human race, human nature, seeing the political turmoil and turbulence, the violence, the havoc that human beings are wreaking on the environment, she responds. And she says, there's really no hope for the human race at this point, and probably the best that we can hope for is that an alien civilization will come and either force us to reform because it'll interject such chaos into our existing relations that we'll have to figure out what to do, or they'll wipe us out, and that just may be for the best. There's a great quote that she gives in the book, and she says, "It is impossible to expect a moral awakening from humankind itself, just like it is impossible to expect humans to lift off the earth by pulling up on their hair. To achieve moral awakening requires a force outside of the human race." So I am going to hit the pause button on the story, and it sounds like I gave away a lot. I mean, it sounds like I gave away like an entire novel. Well, all of that happens relatively early in the novel, and the rest of the novel is about the crisis that ensues from that. So if you're interested, you know, it's still, there's plenty more in this really rich book and story. But I also think that compacted in that really remarkable beginning to a novel are some big and important philosophical questions. In many ways, I think that what science fiction literature does, again, like really all good literature, is it holds a mirror up to ourselves, and it asks us to look inside, and it asks us to, you know, look at how are we perceiving the world? How are we perceiving ourselves? What do we expect from the world? What do we expect in terms of whether the world is a kind and just and gracious place, or whether the world is a hostile, violent, and conflicted place? It asks us to, you know, look inward and examine all of those deep questions that live at the human heart. Now, I think that the three-body problem and this broader trilogy is a pretty pessimistic portrait of humanity and also of the universe. We have the political violence and the ecological destruction. There's betrayal that happens in the book. It's just a really bleak portrait of human beings. And then more broadly than that, it looks outward and it kind of assumes, and this is really the whole point of the second novel in the series, that if we were to find an alien civilization that was sophisticated enough to interact with us, the likelihood that they would want to come and be friends is probably pretty low. And this is actually a view that's shared by Stephen Hawking, I found out. He's actually quite worried about us sending messages out into space for exactly that reason. All of those things, though, are ways that we view each other and view the world. And science fiction literature is not unique in asking these questions. Instead, these are questions that go very deeply into the sort of philosophical and theological tradition in the West. So, are there philosophers who have an equally bleak view of the world? Absolutely. And this goes all the way back to ancient Greece. One of the pre-Socratic philosophers, Anaximander, said that existence will pay for the penalty of simply being, of existing, by its own death and destruction. Basically, all of life will pay for the crime of existence by its own destruction. So he views existence itself as a kind of crime. And then we can look at Schopenhauer, who is one of the most depressing philosophers that you could possibly read. And I mean, his view is that life comes into this brief burst, and we are here, and during that time we experience suffering and pain, and the whole time that we are here, we are stalked by death until it finally takes us. And then one more that I'll mention who knew Schopenhauer and studied with Schopenhauer was Friedrich Nietzsche. And Friedrich Nietzsche has another pretty pessimistic portrait of the human condition. Friedrich Nietzsche, in particular, I mean, he sort of viewed life in those tragic terms, but he also specifically critiqued the moments and the elements of human life that we sort of lift up as the best possible parts of ourselves, the love and compassion and kindness. And he said that those are fictions that we use to cover over what is actually a will to power and to dominate other people. And I'll let you read On the Genealogy of Morals if you want to see his reasoning for why he thinks that. All right, so that's all for today. I'm just kidding. Be the most depressing sermon I think anyone has ever given. I don't think that those philosophers get the last word on this question. And the person I'm thinking about today who gives a sort of response to that kind of philosophy is a theologian. He died, I want to say, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but Marcus Borg, progressive religious thinker, has written many things and written many, truly profound works. But one of the things that he talks about is that he acknowledges the tragic philosophers, and he acknowledges the tragic conditions that would contribute to someone having a pessimistic view of life and of the universe. It's one that is hostile and violent and has destruction and war and pestilence in it. Like he doesn't deny any of that, but he says that that is an option to view the world in that way, and that there is an alternative. There isn't an alternative, which is to view the world and life and the universe and other human beings, this human condition that we find ourselves in, as fundamentally gracious. He says that as much as there are those negative components that we can say qualify life, are a part of life, there's also many things that are just miraculous that we get to witness them at all. The fact that we got to wake up this morning and take a breath and perhaps witness the sunrise, perhaps look at somebody that we love, perhaps experience and share in an act of kindness with another person, perhaps on the way driving here, observe the beauty of a winter landscape. All of those things are readily available to us at any moment. As much as there is pain and suffering in the universe, there is also beauty. There is also goodness. There is also kindness and compassion. And we have a choice about whether we will choose to recognize those things or whether we will choose to ignore them and only look towards the bleak parts of existence. He quotes Jesus here, and specifically he quotes that passage that Nancy read, "But look to the lilies of the field." And this is specifically, people are coming to Jesus and they're saying that they are worried and they're having anxiety about their daily living situations. And, this was a time of real bleakness and oppression in the Roman Empire. So it made a lot of sense that people would be coming to him and asking questions about that. And Jesus's response is not, yes, life is so bad and it's violent and problematic and you should really bask in that bleakness. Instead, it's look at the beauty that we have in front of us today. Are you going to choose to see that? It doesn't for a moment take away the complicated parts of life, but it qualifies life and opens up a different possibility for how we might view the world and how we might view our own existence in it. Now, I mentioned that the three-body problem is a pretty bleak series, but the more I thought about it as I was, crafting this sermon this week, the more I thought there is actually some moments in there that resist that bleakness. And so I'd like to end today with one of those moments, because I think it's really beautifully put. And just as context here, what's happening is that one of the main characters, Dr. Liu, has discovered a way to interact with some of the members of that alien civilization. And he happens to connect with the same creature, person, I'm not sure what to call them. They're called the Trisolarans in the novel. The same Trisolaran who gave the initial do not respond message. And this is what he says to Dr. Liu. Dr. Liu, I have to protest. In the speech that you gave last night, you said that humanity is probably the only species in the universe to have love, and it's this notion that supported you through your darkest periods. I only wish to discuss with you one possibility, one alternative to that. Perhaps seeds of love are present in other places in the universe, and our task is to encourage them to sprout and to grow. Perhaps then the universe isn't so dark, so hostile, so threatening. Perhaps there are seeds of love. Perhaps if we are open to them, they might sprout. What would happen if we decided to love harder, asks the poet Ada Lyman. Perhaps if we made that choice, the goodness that we know is in our hearts could be found in other parts of our lives, of our world, and maybe even our universe as well. Perhaps if those aliens do contact that new station that has been set up, and we're still wondering what message it is that we should craft and offer to them, maybe it should be just that. Just that. There are seeds of love that can sprout anywhere. But in the meantime, even before they do reach out, if they reach out, we can share that message with each other.